everyone. Welcome to this webinar in which we'll review time and effort procedures for our federal programs in our district. So the information that's going to be shared today are the guidelines from the SCDE on requirements for time and effort of federal funds and procedures within our own district. So today we'll talk about some challenges, the requirements, what a semi-annual certification is, what a PAR is, why we have to do this, our district policies and submission requirements, some reminders, some common questions and some scenarios, and then also some resources for you. So the first thing let's talk about are some challenges with time and effort. So in our district, a large percentage of the federal grant funds are used for staffing, and in turn we also have much staff turnover. So that can make which documentation to fill out very confusing and very challenging. And how do you fill it out, and when do you fill it out, and issues like that. There sometimes is a lack of communication between school programs and the fiscal staff at the school, so the financial staff may not know that somebody has left or when they left, or situations like that, so that can also be very confusing. Sometimes there's decentralized responsibilities. We don't really know who's doing what and who's being paid out of what fund. There's a huge complexity of applying requirements to a variety of situations. So you all are very unique and have very unique situations at times, so sometimes understanding which form to fill out can be extremely confusing and challenging. And honestly, people don't like it. Time and effort documentation can be tedious, can be overwhelming, and as we talked about, can be very confusing and challenging, so people just don't like it. There often is a misunderstanding of the requirements. Who fills out what? When do they fill it out? How do we know what we're supposed to fill out? So hopefully this webinar is going to answer some of those questions for you. So just looking at the regulations, the state regulations basically indicate that any changes to federal awards or any federal grant money or awards that are being used for personnel services such as salaries and wages, so they have to be documented and they must be based on records that accurately reflect the work performed. So we have to keep the documentation and we have to show the work that was performed by the individual. Our policies indicate the two forms. So the first form is the semi-annual certification. So this is going to be submitted via Epicenter every 6 months. It's going to be submitted in January and June. And it's for employees working 100% of the time in the federal grant program. So they work, all of their time is spent either in special education or in Title I. The PAR, or Personal Activity Report, are submitted monthly via Epicenter, and they're submitted at the end of every month. And those are for employees who are working partially in one federal grant program and another. So for example, if you have an individual working in special education and in Title I, those are two federal grant programs in which the funding is from two different grants. So why do we do this? Again, time and effort. If federal funds are used for salaries, then time distribution records are required by the state, so we have to show those records. We must demonstrate if the employee is paid with federal funds, then the employee worked on that specific federal program or cost objective. So we have to show the proof that if they are paid with those federal funds, that they actually worked on that specific program. So who must participate? Anyone who's working on a federal program. It does not include contractors. So it doesn't include like speech contractors, OT contracts, and it's all employees paid with federal funds or partial federal funds, and some employees paid with non-federal funds. So semi-annual certification. So that is completed for any employee whose work is funded 100% by the single cost objective or a single federal grant award. It must be completed every 6 months, January and June. It must be signed by the employee and supervisor with direct knowledge of the work being performed. It's an after-the-fact distribution of actual activity, so it's not signed prior, it's signed after the work occurs. It accounts for 100% of the employee's activity, and it must be signed within 15 calendar days of the last day of the timeline. So, for example, our first semi-annual goes from July 1st to December 31st, so that must be signed no later than January 15th, 15 days after the 31st. So here's what our semi-annual certification looks like. This is a Word document, so it is editable, which means you can edit these dates here. You see here this says July 1, 17 to December. Since this is a Word document, you can go in and change those years as you need to. So all of these are submitted through Epicenter. Any incomplete or incorrect submissions will be rejected and returned, and you'll be asked to resubmit. All signatures must be completed. And then over here you see the dates must match the submission date. So this is to certify that Sally Jones has worked 100% of her time for the time period of July 1st, 2017 to December 31st on IDA grant program. Then we have Sally Jones' signature, Sally Jones' printed name, and then the date that this is signed must be December 31st or later. So it can't be signed in October or September. It's signed after the fact. So it's as of that day or later, but no later than 15 days. Here you have your supervisor's signature, the printed name, and again that date. These dates should be the same. We should be signing these on the same day. Again, since it is editable, you can change this from whatever program or program it is. If it's Title I, this is IDA. But again, this is an editable document, so you can change and manipulate it as you need. This is and will be attached into Epicenter with the submission for you to download and use as you need. So this is what the blank document that looks like. Again, you can change on this to the grant that you need it to be, and then to the dates, of course, that it needs to be. So this is going to be for any employee who spends 100% of their time in that single federal grant. The Personal Activity Report, or the PAR, is for an employee who is funded partially on one or more federal grant programs or cost objectives. So this must be completed monthly and submitted monthly. It's supported by records, such as calendars, written records for each day and week. It must be signed by the employee and supervisor with direct knowledge of the work being performed. Again, it's an after-the-fact distribution, so it's after the work has occurred, not before it has occurred. It accounts for 100% of the employee's activity, and like the semi-annual, it must be signed no later than 15 days after the end of the documented month. So again, for example, the month of December, we end on December 31st, so that form must be signed no later than January 15th. Here is a form, a PAR that we've created that we're asking folks to use. So you can see anything in red is what you or your employee is going to fill out. So you want to make sure that you put the date and the month of the funding, the statement, so what are the two grants that are being funded through, and then you want to make sure you're going to add the percentage. So for example, this individual was an IDA and Title I, so they spent 75% of their time in IDA and 25% in Title I, and you can see they calculated the hours. This is a basic schedule. Again, this is another Word document that can be edited. You can change the schedule to the times that fit that individual schedule. The days, this is an example of 1 week in August. Obviously, we're looking for a month's worth, so we'd look for 4 weeks of this. So here's an example on Monday on the 15th from 8 to 9. This individual did resource instruction for students with disabilities. From 9 to 10, we did the same. And then 10 to 11, you can see they worked in Title I, and they pulled a small group intervention with grade 2. Again, another example for Tuesday. This is as specific as you need to get. You don't need to indicate the specific children, so you wouldn't say resource instruction for Sally, Billy, and Johnny. You can just say resource instruction for students with disabilities. for Title I, you wouldn't have to say small group intervention with, you know, John, Kim, and Sam. You can just say with grade 2 or grade 1. In the end, you have your 2 grants and your total hours for that week that were spent, and then again, the total hours end up here. So anything in red you can see you will fill out, or your instructor or teacher, whoever is completing this, fills it out, and then also required are signatures. So you'll see that on the blank form. So here's the blank document that is attached in Epicenter as well with the submission in case you have to do a personal activity report. Again, it's a Word document. You can edit it. You can add your times, all of that. You just need to make sure you fill it out and that it's signed by your staff and your supervisor. Again, it's going to happen at the end of the month and no later than 15 days after the end of the month. So we shouldn't see this schedule for August and have this signed August 1st because the month hasn't occurred yet. So it has to be at the end of the month. And this gets submitted monthly. So why do we have to do this besides the fact that the state and policies tell us we have to? Again, it's to make sure that we have a system of those internal controls to assure that the charges are accurate, allowable, and properly allocated, to make sure that we basically are spending our federal funds and grants as we're allowed to by the regulations, and that we're also showing documentation that, in fact, you and the schools are also doing and spending as you say and within the guidelines. Okay. It's also for when we have changes and any payroll charges match the actual distribution. So again, it's just that system of checks and balances to ensure that what you're submitting as budgets and using for federal grant programs is actually what is happening and occurring at the schools, and we need that documentation. That's the whys in the nutshell. So our policy and submission requirements. So the time and effort policies will be placed on our Google Sites on both the federal programs and the support services. All submissions will go through Epicenter. The tasks will be created and reminders will be sent via Epicenter. Submissions are due by the 20th of each month for PAR. So for example, December PAR must be submitted by January 20th in Epicenter. Semi-annuals, the first submission is by January 20th. The second submission would be by June 20th. Remember that semi-annual is only submitted twice a year. Any incomplete submissions will be rejected in Epicenter and you will have to resubmit. So please review it, ensure it's correct prior to submitting. Make sure you have your signatures, make sure your dates are correct, make sure the person's name is correct. All of that, please make sure they are fully completed when you submit those forms. Just some basic reminders. So your semi-annual, again, is going to be completed every 6 months and submitted via Epicenter. The PAR is completed and submitted monthly via Epicenter. The information and forms are found on the 2 below Google Sites, the support services and the federal programs, and there are the links to those 2 Google Sites right there. There are some also additional resources in terms of Title II and some documentation if you do signing bonuses. So those are all for our Title II programs, and the links for those resources are there as well. So some common questions or scenarios that we often get. So one question we sometimes get is we have an individual who is serving as a school psychologist and a SPED coordinator. So do we fill out a PAR? Do we fill out a semi-annual? So the answer would be that individual would do a semi-annual, because the time spent is really in 100% of the time they're working in special education, including those initial evaluations they're doing, because at that point the students are suspected of a disability. So an individual who's serving as your psychologist and your SPED coordinator would actually complete a semi-annual. The next question, individual who serves as a SPED coordinator and the RTI coordinator. We've seen a lot of this in some of the buildings and have actually gotten a lot of questions. So that actually is going to be a PAR. The special ed coordinator time would be documented through your IDA funds, and your RTI you pay through general funds, because RTI is a general education initiative. It is not a special education initiative, so that would require a PAR because they're two different programs. Another question we get is, what if IDA funds only cover 50% of the special ed teacher or coordinator salary and general funds cover the remainder? So this is not about the percentage of salary that the funds cover. It is about the time spent working in the programs. So in that case, the individual would fill out a semi-annual, because even though your IDA funds didn't cover 100% of that salary, they're still only working in special education. So 100% of the time is still spent in special education. So that would be a semi-annual. It's not about how much of the salary the grant covers. It's about how much time the individual spends working in that particular federal grant. Another question is, what about an individual who serves as a Title I coordinator and a SPED coordinator? Again, that's going to be a PAR. So Title I time would be documented through those Title I funds and SPED through IDA. Those are two different federal grant programs. Here are some common scenarios that we've added to help you understand maybe what forms you fill out and maybe some situations that you've run into. So an example would be a salary for an instructional or academic coach or a professional learning specialist. So if they're wholly funded by Title II Part A, then that's going to be a semi-annual certification. If you have a salary for the same individual, but partially funded by Title II Part A and other funding sources or another grant, that's going to be a PAR. So hopefully, please, read through these, and if there's any other scenarios that you've come up with that aren't here, you certainly can reach out for assistance. And who do you contact? So here below are the people that you contact. You can contact me. I'm Laura, the Director of Special Ed, or Susan Howard, who's our other Director of Special Ed, or also Tracy Sweet, who's our Director of Federal Programs. And there is our emails there for your contact. So overall, when in doubt, please ask us. We realize that time and effort documentation is very confusing. It can be challenging, and that each of you have unique situations. So please feel free to reach out to any one of us to help and assist, so we can help you with what form you need to fill out and answer any other questions that you may have. So hopefully you found this a little helpful. Again, if you have any questions, when in doubt, please ask us.